Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock and this is City of Heroes. We are with a level 32, almost level 33. It will definitely happen this episode. So we only have 15,000 XP to go. Level 32, almost level 33. Brute. Liberty Last has 11, almost 12 million influence. And we're on a story arc, Rise of the Vampire, for Jose Escalante. And he says, according to the files we found, Council is planning to radically alter their vampire creation process. They plan to start using a genetic mutation, so we've got to go and investigate what they're doing and probably stop them, because that is what we do, is we stop the council from doing evil stuff. They're in Brickstown, so we'll just hit the train station and head on over there. I hope everybody's having a pleasant month of March, I guess, should be now. Today is March 1st as I filmed this, so you should be seeing this in March if you're watching it when it first came out. And it is definitely in my area starting to head toward spring. We're getting temperatures in the 50s and 60s Fahrenheit, occasionally 40s, but more like 50s and 60s. And in my part of the southeast, usually by mid to late March, we're well into spring. So winter is coming to an end. The days are getting longer and nights shorter, and soon we'll be at the vernal equinox, and I always like that because I like the longer, warmer days. I was born in the winter, but I'm a child of summer. I really like the warm weather much better. I like wearing shorts and t-shirts instead of sweatshirts and things like that. So we're going to head over here and probably into a sewer, it looks like, maybe, to find the vampire. Or maybe it's a warehouse. No, it's a sewer or a cave. There we go. And in we go, guys. And just to rehash, one of the things I have done to change my hotbar is to move. I literally always put my attacks on bar 1 down at the bottom, but I've moved this one, energy transfer, up to the top so that I don't accidentally trigger it as part of my attack chain, because it's really not. It's just supposed to happen when we're under total focus mode, because it's so much faster and it's so slow in animation time when it's not under total focus mode that it's not really worth doing. Let's get some AoEs in here. Then we'll go up into focus mode. That almost kills off that, or takes out that guy, so we'll switch to another guy. Between total focus and energy transfer, I keep forgetting the names of these powers, we can take out almost 2 guys in 2 blows, and we will probably be able to once we have damage enhancers on those powers. So I hope you guys are having a good time. I certainly am having a good time playing and enjoying it quite a bit. So I wanted to talk about something regarding role-playing games that came up on another channel. It's actually come up in a couple of places. I guess that's why it popped up in my feed. I watched one video about it, and then there were 2 or 3 others. And the question was, what they asked was, is paid game mastering, paid GMing, a good or bad thing, or maybe a neutral thing for the role-playing game hobby? And Luke Hart has a video from some months ago. I don't know why it popped up in my feed now, but it did. He is a paid GM, right? So he runs a couple of games for his like Patreon subscribers and stuff. I know he runs at least one. It might be 2, or maybe like one regular one, and then sometimes a special one-shot or whatever. And so he gets paid to game master Dungeons and Dragons, and I know a number of other people do that as well. And my best friend is part of multiple groups that got that basically formed from paid GMing. And the consensus in the comments for Luke's channel, the DM Lair, as well as Luke's overall take on it, was that there's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't harm the hobby at all. And actually, it's pretty good because it helps people who can't find games find games. So I'm going to do is agree and disagree a little bit about this. I think that it's definitely the case that there have always been way more people who want to play. Matt Colville says this. There's always been thousands more people who want to play D&D than who can actually play it. There are tons of people who want to play and none of their friends will, or a couple of people who are friends and might want to play but nobody can GM because they don't know how, or they don't have time, or they don't want to, or whatever. And so, in the sense that there have always been people who wanted to play, and having a paid GM on a site like Roll20 or whatever gives them the opportunity to play D&D, you can certainly see how it would be considered a positive thing, and I guess in that sense that it is. Colville actually started out by talking about why did Critical Role become a hit show on the internet. If you had said before it happened that a group of players, even actors, could get together and like play D&D, film themselves playing D&D, and have hundreds of thousands of followers and make millions of dollars on it, and most of us who play role-playing games would laugh in your face. Nobody's going to watch that. Heck, when my best friend told me he was watching people play D&D, I thought, well, who would want to do that, right? I tell you wouldn't want to watch my group play. We have fun, but we're playing, right? We're not entertainers, and I don't think it would be entertaining to anybody to watch. So, anybody who looked at the idea of Critical Role years ago, before it started to be popular, would have probably said it's not going to be. And in fact, my understanding is that Matt Mercer and company didn't expect it to be. They thought they would shoot a couple of episodes, maybe 8 or 10 episodes, get a few thousand views, and that was going to be the end of it. And then it took off and became very popular, and it became basically what they could do for a living now. And it has spawned an entire genre on YouTube of what do you want to call it, quote-unquote actual plays. Now I hesitate to call them that because they're not actual plays in the sense that it would be if you watched my group, because my group isn't entertainers and we're just playing the game, whereas these people on the actual plays are trying to be entertaining to the public, and they have some training in that, and so on and so forth. It's not to knock what they're doing. I want to be very clear, it's fine what they're doing. But Colville asked, and I mentioned this in my Truck Simulator playthrough. Colville asked the question, why did this become popular in the first place? And his answer was that a lot of people, historically, have wanted to play D&D and haven't been able to. He said something like, he suspects it's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and that maybe the majority of people who purchase the role-playing game books have never actually played those role-playing games. That they buy the books. Some of these people, he said, have been buying the books for years. They bought first edition and second edition and third edition D&D, and they've read all the books and they know all the rules, at least the way it's written in the books. But they've never ever gotten a chance to play the game. And so when these actual plays came along, and you could watch people, yes, they're being performative and that sort of thing, but they're still playing the game more or less by the rules and doing initiative and combat and all of that, kind of pretty much the way it says in the rules, with maybe some house rules for the sake of the video and the streaming, and we've leveled up. That you're actually getting to see how initiative works and how stealth works and how skill rolls work and that sort of thing, and you get to see how it plays the way you never got to do before, since you never had anybody to play with. Right now, I always find this kind of hard to imagine, because my best friend and I decided to play D&D when we were in 7th grade and, never looked back. But a lot of people apparently, according to Colville, and I think he's right, have bought the books and everything and never played the game. And this allowed them to watch the game. And I know from even with my best friend who had experience with it that watching it made him want to play it. He kept messaging me with these very, like, almost desperate pleas that we've got to find a way to play D&D together somehow, because I'm watching this actual play and it's making me want to play D&D. And I'm sure it was at least equivalent, if not more so, for people who've never played D&D, watching it, saying, now that I've seen it, I want to play this game, right? And they still don't have any friends to play with. And so they go to start playing games or Roll20 or one of these other places, and they look for posts of people who have paid GMing gigs, and they spend $20 a week or $30 a week or whatever it is to play the game with strangers on Zoom or whatever. And the pandemic really brought this to the forefront and made it a much bigger industry, shall we say, because before the pandemic, I mean, I'd never even heard of Zoom. I never used it, and I'm sure lots of people had heard of it but hardly used it. The idea of doing this stuff over the internet was unusual, and then all of a sudden we're teaching classes on the internet, we're holding meetings on the internet, we're having seminars on the internet. Heck, I've been to scientific conferences on the internet now, where the whole thing was done online, including poster sessions, which worked surprisingly well considering how weird it is to have a scientific poster session and not be standing at somebody's poster and talking to them. And so, since we started getting used to doing everything else on the internet, we're now used to doing role-playing games on the internet. And so then paid GMing made sense. It became a feasible thing, and lots of people got into it. And in a large sense, I don't object to it. But I do think that paid GMing has caused there to be some very negative consequences to the role-playing game hobby that shouldn't be ignored just because there are positives, right? There are pros, and maybe more than enough of them to, be okay with it, but there are some cons. There's a major con in my view. And that is that it has changed the norm for role-playing games to something very different from what they used to be 10, 15 years ago, when paid GMing wasn't really much of a thing. I'm sure there was a little of it, because there's always a little of you can always pay for stuff, right? There's always a little of that. But I think that there's been an explosion of it now. And what's started to happen is it's almost becoming the default, right? The default in the past was always that you played a game of Dungeons and Dragons or Champions or anything like that with your friends. It was a game played with friends. It even says in the Champions rules, second edition, that Champions is a game, is the whole idea of playing a role-playing game is to sit around making up stories and having fun with your friends, right? It doesn't say with strangers, it says with your friends. And the assumption of game designers and of the people in the gaming hobby has always been that the people you're going to play with are your friends. And now what's happened is we've started to switch that assumption to the assumption is that you mostly play with strangers. You pay a GM, and the other people in the room don't know you except insofar as they know you from their D&D game, but they don't know you otherwise. And I feel like this has some pretty strong consequences for how role-playing games are experienced. Oh, we got to level up. I forgot to do that. How role-playing games are experienced by players, and also the assumptions that people make about them, right? So if we think about, for example, there has been a proliferation of what they call safety tools, right? Role-playing game safety tools. Things like X cards, right? Where everybody's got a card with an X, like a red X on it, and they leave it in front of them, face down. And if anything at all happens in the game that you feel uncomfortable with, you lift the X card so that everybody can see it, and the GM is supposed to just move on from whatever that scene is. Rules of X cards often include you're not allowed to ask for details. Why is this an X card? I'm not sure if you're even allowed to ask what's bothering you about the scene. I don't think you are. You just, okay, we're fighting a bunch of vampiri, and the GM describes the vampiri coming out of the birthing chamber, and the player holds up the X card. And you say, okay, well, you guys defeat the vampiri, and we're going to move on to another scene because an X card was played. Um, but the issue with that, and I've talked about this with a friend of mine, is that if you don't tell me what it is about that scene, is it the birthing chamber, the vampiri, the graphic description of the gore on their fangs, or whatever, what is it that made you hold up the X card, then the chances are I might do it again because I don't know what not to do. So there's some pretty draconian rules about this, all designed to sort of protect players from each other so that nobody upsets anybody, right? Because we're playing the game to have fun, not to be upset. And you might upset people accidentally, right? And the X card helps you not to do that. However, the reason you need stuff like that, or like Colville, right? He put out a sheet, right, with all the possible things that you could be bothered by: body horror and gore and, assault and kidnapping, and, you just name it. Dozens and dozens of things on the list. And on the list, you're supposed to circle or check off whether this is something that lines, veils, or what is it called, NMC, right? A line is something that cannot be crossed. We don't have anything to do with this in our game. A veil is something that it's okay if it happens like off screen. We know that there's, say, slavery in the world, but we're not going to role play about it. And then NMC is, I don't even mind if it's in the role play, but don't do it to my character, right? Like, let's say you're just not comfortable role-playing love affairs, so you just put love affair and say an MC. Okay? And there's a whole list of these things. And there are a bunch of other tools that people use for these safety tools so that nobody gets upset. What I argue is, and it's not to say that it's perfect when you have a group of friends, but groups of friends are much less likely to really need these safety tools. My friends and I never did. Friends will tend to know each other's pressure points. They already know that this person comes from a background where this certain stuff happened. So, for example, my father died when I was a teenager, and all of my friends knew it. Okay? And so they were smart enough and sensitive enough and knowledgeable enough to realize that I probably would not want to roleplay about my character's father dying when my character was young. So they just didn't write that into any scenarios. People's fathers didn't die very often in our game because they would realize it might bother me. It wouldn't bother me now, but it might have bothered me when I was a teenager, right after it had happened. And so a few years later, my grandmother died. So they probably wouldn't have had a story about somebody's grandmother dying that year because they knew what had happened, right? If you know people, you can figure out what their pressure points are, and also if you are friends with each other, you're not afraid to tell each other your pressure points. All right, so when you're playing with strangers, those people don't know you. Even like my best friend who's in, several paid games. He's been some of them for a long time, and I said I want to play with friends, and he said, well, they become friends eventually. Yeah, but not that kind of friend, right? They, like, yes, you're friends with them, but they don't live in your town. They don't see you outside of the game, and they're not necessarily going to know the things that are the pressure points, the things that upset you from your everyday life, because they're not part of your everyday life. But if you're playing with actual friends who are friends with you in your everyday life, they will know those pressure points and probably are going to avoid them. And you're also able to talk outside of the game, very, like around the water cooler or whatever, and you can talk about these things that may be bothering you in between sessions so that it doesn't actually even need to come up during the session, which is the kind of thing we did when I played Champions. We talked about stuff in between sessions. We talked about stuff on the way to the mall or on the way to go see a movie or while we were waiting online to go see a movie. Last night's champion session would come up and we'd talk about it. If something bothered somebody, they'd say it. And as a consequence, we didn't have to really worry about things like X cards because we were all friends. And as friends, trying to get out of the burn patch. As friends, we kind of knew what would upset each other, and we avoided that stuff, right? And so I think that one of the issues with turning the game into a game that is by default played with strangers is you're getting these consequences where you have to have these X cards because you're no longer playing with friends. And this fundamentally changes how the game plays, how it works, how we see each other as fellow players in the game. And it's gone to the point where even a lot of the role-playing game companies are starting to build safety tools and those kinds of warnings into the game, and maybe even build mechanics into the game that by default you're quote-unquote required to use unless you're going to house rule them out. And these are things that you primarily need when you're not playing with people who you have known for a long time as friends, right? I think that it's I think that it changes the nature of the game, and it changes it in ways that I think may not entirely be positive, right? That it's changed from a game that is by default played with your friends and we all know each other to a game that is by default played with strangers and we have to be like protected from them, you know? And I think that that really changes how the game is approached. And man, I over aggroed. Shoot, I keep hitting the wrong attack here. Come on. So I don't know. And you guys can tell me what you think about this, but I think that it's unavoidable that this dramatically changes the game, and I'm not sure it changes it for the better to have it be something that people by default are playing with strangers, and that you're just one of the lucky ones if you have friends to play with, right? Whereas in the old days with Champions and old Dungeons and Dragons and the rest of the games that I remember playing, the implicit assumption of the rules and everything about how the game was designed was that you and a bunch of your friends are going to be playing together as friends. And so I think this really changes the nature of the game. It forces the designers to do things that they might not have otherwise done. A great example of this is Starforged. There are built into the what do you call it, the gameplay cycle of the game is to, every time you go through a session, at the beginning of the session and at various checkpoints during the session, you're supposed to make a move, just like the other moves such as investigating a site or delving a dungeon or investigating a sector of space. You're supposed to make a move where you're basically checking in with each other and making sure everybody's still okay with the roleplay as it's going. Why did that have to be put into the rules? Because everybody's doing safety tools now. And why is everybody doing safety tools? Because we're assuming that people are playing these games, possibly, potentially, maybe primarily with strangers. And if you're playing with a friend, you're lucky. But I always avoid this room if I can, because it's a waste of time, but we'll go back to it if we can't find the stuff anywhere else. Yeah, the assumption is that you're going to play with strangers and that the strangers can't be trusted partly because they don't know you, um, and therefore they can't know your pressure points and your, things that are going to bother you and so on and so forth. And so we have to put actual mechanics into the game that are part of the gameplay loop to ensure that all of these strangers you're playing with don't upset you or make the game not be fun for you, right? And it's not that friends playing together don't need these things ever, but there is a reduced need for them if you're playing with friends. I mean, I use them in my Deadlands game, but you have to realize that although I am friendly with the people in the game, two of them are strangers to me outside of the game. I mean, we enjoy each other. We have a lot of fun together. We do sometimes communicate sort of outside the game, but they're internet friends, and I don't know what their lives are like in person, right? And they have kids and families, and I've never met their kids or their families. So if there's something that might upset them about, you know, maybe the kid has some sort of an issue that I don't know about, right? Some medical issue or whatever, and then I make that part of the role play because I don't know, right? And now the person is upset about it. So, yeah, even my group, we have to use lines and veils because we're not playing with a closed group of friends who all know each other. My best friend's in the group. I don't need any lines and veils with him, and he doesn't need them with me. We know each other pretty dang well. And also, both of us are pretty darn thick skinned. And so, yeah, if it was just me and my old Champions friends, I don't think I'd do lines and veils. But because it's even like the one girl who I call the new girl. Where's the level up guy? Here. Oh, we're in Bricktown, aren't we? Or no, we're in Skyway. Here we go. Minx. Um, you know, even though one of the new girl is a former colleague of mine, again, she's a former colleague, not just a plain old friend, and that is a different kind of a relationship. So you got to be kind of careful with that. And so, yeah, it's a little different when you have people that aren't your like in-person, real-life close friends. And again, since I do it, I'm not saying nobody should play with people who aren't their close friends, but I think that mode becoming the default, which partly happened because of paid GMing, is affecting how these games are played, how they're written, and potentially making aspects of them, frankly, less fun for some of us. I don't know. That's my thought. What are your thoughts? You can let me know in the comments. All right, so we've added a slot each to Barrage and Energy Punch, and we'll add a slot here to Rise to the Challenge. So it's going to get health and damage. Let's see, do we have recipes for that? We do have a healing, and we do have 2 damage, which we have enough stuff to make. So let us go to the base. Where's the base portal around here? There it is. And we're going to craft our enhancements right here and now. And this is the nice thing about the generic IOs. You can just craft them immediately, right? Because they're going to stick around forever. And we don't have to worry about them needing to level up. We can just go straight over here. Whoops, straight over here to the crafting bench. I have done no work on this base in quite some time. I still a lot of work to do on it. But let's go ahead and grab a couple damages. 1, 2. And then for healing, we need Ancient Bone. So let's take a look at what we've got here. There's some Ancient Bone. So we'll grab those. And we'll come over here. And we've now got a healing. Boom. And now we can go ahead and slot a damage on each of these. So that's going to greatly improve our damage. So Barrage now does 86 instead of 62 damage each time we hit with it, and Energy Punch does 52 instead of 38, so that's good. And then we're going to go and add Rise to the Challenge right there. So if we look at that information, we can see that we're now at 50% regeneration rate on ourselves. Sorry, we're at 100%, right? No, we're at 50. Sorry, we're at 50%, which is a 100% increase over the base, and then our expanded is at 200%. So there's like two different parts to the regeneration. Also, this is a taunt, but we're not going to use it for taunt. So Rise of the Challenge is finished now. Um, we're going to keep working Barrage and Energy Punch until they're finished, I think. We also want to get Power Crash and Energy Transfer enhanced, but it's going to take us a few levels to get that up. And Total Focus as well, we need to put damage on that. And probably Endurance. Yeah. So we have a recharge on it right now. We need to put Endurance on it and then eventually damage and 2-hit and so on. But everything looks pretty good for now. I think I'm pretty happy with the way this is working. Our character's looking pretty good. I hope you guys have enjoyed. And until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes.